A few months ago, I've been saving enough of my own money on hand to get myself a Switch 2 for myself, just so I can experience some other Switch 2 games like DK Bonanza and maybe even better running version of Switch 1 games as well. Yet, despite my best efforts, every single local store I go to, not even a single console in there, just only the games and pretty much even the accessories. Later on, I was actually able to acquire a Switch 2 at an eBay auction. The money that was going to the Switch 2 was used instead for a secondhand PS5 at a random thrift store and Astrobot. And let me tell you, Astrobot is just so good. A 3D platformer game that came from Team Asobi with devs that moved from the shutdown of Japan studios. Astrobot is pretty much a love letter to PlayStation's entire history, going from the PS1 to the PS5. Not just only from the first parties, but even third parties as well. The entire game is really delightful to play. It has really creative level designs, great soundtrack, and even some really fun boss fights that even put Mario to stream. In fact, even at the end of each area, there's an entire level that is themed to one specific franchise, like Ape Escape and God of War. But I should mention that I haven't actually finished the entire game, just only 2 chapters, but I will get to finish it eventually. Concord was supposed to be PlayStation's big hit for 2024, while Astrobot was supposed to be their dessert for PlayStation fans. Yet you know the story. Concord only lasted for 2 weeks before shutting the servers down. PlayStation lost $400 million, wasted 8 years of development, and the studios that made the game got shut down. Yet, Astrobot got the highest rating on IMDb and other news sites, and even won Game of the Year for 2024. Which, that was a pretty big surprise. The first ever 3D platformer game to win Game of the Year, and pretty much a PlayStation platformer game that had been praised by everybody, especially Nintendo fans. That's a huge accomplishment for Team Asobi and Astrobot. I mean, all of us agree that Astrobot is pretty much peak platforming joy. There's not even a single flaw that pretty much ruins the entire experience of the game. Not even one problem that pretty much calls into questioning on why people praise it online everywhere compared to other games. Well, actually, there is one problem about the game I do kind of have beef with. And it pretty much is an opinion, but even still, this is a problem that I keep thinking about over and over again, and it doesn't seem to be keeping out on the back of my mind. And it's that, so many people who played Astrobot on PS5 only seems to pretty much say that Astrobot was their second platformer game on the PS5. Not even their third or fourth platformer. Just a second.
It goes without saying, we are getting a lot more 3D platformers these days, but most of them are indie. But we don't really get that Nintendo style AAA, super high budget, high polish 3D platformer. We don't get that a whole lot.
Okay, I think that these people who are clamoring for the demand of these old long dead franchises to come back, trying to call out on these big companies to show them that they have been a neglectful family by leaving these series to die, are very much the same people who are pretty much also buying the same games as they say they are soulless, yet ignore the actual game that they actually asked for. And yet they always ask the same question: why can't these companies make the games like I used to love back in the day? And that's why, with my smiled intellect and with me coming to the conclusion that I think everyone online is dumb except for me, is gonna do what none of these players who play the same soulless game will ever do. Actually play the other AAA platformers that aren't just from Nintendo or indie devs. I have 3 platformer games that Sony released during the PS5 era that are well brilliant in their own right and are masterpieces that aren't just memorabilia the game. I think we should start out with a little game that pretty much flew under the radar in everyone's eyes. A game that I think is underrated and deserves to be recognized by everyone and not just be the game that is labeled, haha, the game that performed worse than Concord. And it's like a Horizon Adventures. LEGO Horizon is one out of the 2 Horizon spin-off games released during the PS5 era, and unsurprisingly, it's the first Sony game to ever be a multi-platformer release on other systems. No, MLB doesn't count. LEGO Horizon is very much a different game compared to the first 2 mainline games. It pretty much played just like most of the Traveler's Tales LEGO games ever since. It's a linear design game with loads of platforming combat accounts in each area, a co-op mode that you can play with a friend, and this game's plot is a retelling of the first game, Horizon Zero Dawn. I'm actually not familiar with the Horizon series myself, only finished the LEGO game instead. But for this video, I decided to boot up the original game to get familiar so I have context for the LEGO game. And from what I played and from what I can gather in a video of someone who played through the entirety of both games, most of the story from the original is very much somewhat almost the same as the LEGO game. There are differences with both games' story beats, like how Aloy got her scanning ability. Other hunters who weren't playable in the original game come with you on your journey, in which you can actually play as them as well, which is pretty much their workaround for including co-op in the game, and pretty much losing a couple of features that were odd omissions that were very much expected. Now, understandably, I get why they had to remove a couple of mechanics since the level design just wouldn't work with how it is structured, and with how they decided to scrap that crafting mechanic and replace it with the elemental weapons and gadgets. I think it was a good move to do that. But to not have crucial mechanics that were in the TT LEGO games like special abilities, extra collectibles, clever puzzles, and the hijacking ability from Horizon, it feels a lot more empty than what we got from the old LEGO games. Now, I understand this game does have a lot of collectibles like the gold and red bricks that you could collect in each of the 5 areas of the game. The outfits that you can unlock are pretty jam-packed, and you're not limited to who can wear what. You can even throw one of your villagers in the town into one of the closets that you build in the game. You can have Grandma wear a construction worker's outfit, Aloy can be Sackboy, and Faro as hey, you can even customize the town if you like. You can actually replace the roofs on the buildings with cool stuff like a roller coaster, plate decorations, small attractions, and even replace the area's floor with a different color of the grass. But with that being said,
oh my fucking god, just let me fucking leave. I actually don't want to keep fighting enemies. I want to skip it. I just want to...
LEGO Horizons have a lot of problems that keeps them from being a really good platformer in my eyes. It does have a problem with how the levels are structured. You pretty much explore the section of the level by platforming and sometimes even leaving the area at the end. And sometimes at the end of each area, there are arena challenges where you have to find a bunch of enemies and or big robot dinosaurs before you can even explore more. But it's not even a bad structure for the game. It works very well for what it can do. It's just that if you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again without any unique variety or way that could change the structure of the game, just don't be surprised when people pretty much compare it to a bad licensed video game. Cause the structure of each level goes like this. You explore the level by platforming to the arena and take out most of the enemies to progress. But then in the next area, you pretty much do the same things that you did in the previous area, and it doesn't change a lot. The only thing that is different though is sometimes you don't actually have to fight enemies to progress. But not even like a vehicle section that can actually help spice the game a little bit. If you somewhat go off the beaten path, you're pretty much only gonna get rewarded with studs and such. In fact, treasures chests and building some small structures like hot dogs only award you studs. And that's pretty much the problem why this game unfortunately feels like you are going through the motions. Repeating patterns, getting rewarded with less or even nothing. Dying constantly and going through the same familiar areas that you already went through just so you can see something different in the next area. And even then, the fucking game is so badly optimized for PC that you seriously need to dig through the settings to get the game running at a consistent frame rate. Especially if you're using a recording program, which pretty much gives more work for the CPU and GPU. Really, the recommended spec says that you need a 3070 or a 6800 to run the game properly. Man, it's so hard to give compliments to a game that's at least not great. And I'm not even sure if I want to keep going. I haven't even talked about the other playable characters that you could choose. Although, I guess there are positives I could give to this game. It looks so beautiful for a Lego game. The lighting and the texture work is done super well. The world is miraculously designed like a Lego set. They limited the animations just like how the Lego figures move. They used the Lego movie as an inspiration for the entire game, and they did a really good job capturing the feeling of a Lego made movie. Although, do you remember when I said that there was barely no variety for the entire game? I was kinda mostly lying. The dungeons are pretty much the best levels I have ever played, and it's pretty obvious that the original and the Lego game took some notes on the Legend of Zelda series and made the dungeons a puzzle-focused area that you have to figure out. It's not as complicated in the Lego games than it was in the original, but it's still well made. And there's even boss fights in most of the dungeons that you have to fight at the end to end the level. And from what I played, the boss fights were actually really good. And I guess the last thing I will talk about before ending my thoughts on the game is the playable characters. Aloy is the arrow shooter and can hit enemies from afar, and she's pretty much the all-around character. Barl is actually the same as Aloy with the benefit of his ability to pierce through enemies with his spear. And having a fat ass. Eren is pretty much actually my favorite character to play as, but I'll get into him in a little bit, because first of all, Teersa. Oh man, Teersa, what have they done to you after launch? Okay, before we continue, I have a confession to make. I pre-ordered the digital deluxe edition of the game. Why? Well, because I wanted to get the extra costumes and that silly looking roller coaster thing. Why did I confess I wasted my money on the game? Well, you see, there's this playable character in the game named Teersa. She pretty much throws her projectiles in an arc. They do a ton of damage to enemies, which sounds pretty good, but there's a problem with how this character attacks, more or less. You see, when you aim to attack an enemy, you aim with the left stick in one direction because, well, it makes sense. You have to be moving a lot to afford getting attacked a lot. Moving and planning out an attack is how the game is supposed to work. It's how the original is. The original may be more complicated, it has a lot more to do than the Lego game, but moving and planning is still a factor. It's why when you're aiming a weapon at an enemy, there's a reason why you can only aim in a straight line and on the ground. Because this game decided to make the left analog stick aim at any direction on the ground. If this game actually lets you aim at any direction, not on the ground but even in the air, it will not also feel awkward to aim with the left analog stick, but it will also even make the combat feel more frustrating because you're trying to like aim at a weak point to kill the enemy, but you also have to like dodge out of the way so you don't get killed easily because you pretty much die in like a couple of hits. And that's the reason why Aloy Far the Rat attacks works just like that. It works for the way the game was designed. But for Teersa's attack, it does not work. It really doesn't. If you hold the attack button to aim your projectile, you can actually aim anywhere you want to throw it. In theory, it's pretty much useful because you could take advantage of this character and pretty much attack enemies who are behind a small hill or behind a pile of metal. And there's a cheese method that you can use by attacking enemies on top of the hill so you don't have to like engage with the enemies. But in execution, you are at a disadvantage. If the enemies are always coming your way, or if they do in a shockwave, you're supposed to be jumping or moving out of the way to avoid damage. But if you're trying to aim your projectile to his weak point and an attack is coming, you don't have enough of a reaction time to jump and avoid it. In fact, you pretty much are going to lose your health very quickly if you're on a higher difficulty. And so Teersa is very much the worst character to play as. Well, unless you were playing the game earlier at launch. See, Teersa's wind-up was broken at launch and you could just spam the button and throw more projectiles, pretty much annihilate enemies in a flash. I mean, you're still vulnerable, you have to dodge out of the way, but you can still spam the button to destroy the enemies much quickly before you can say Concord. But unfortunately, they fixed the bug where you have to wait for a few seconds to throw another one. And so, Teersa is the worst playable character in the game. Although that's very funny because in my first playthrough, I had considered Ratchet to be the #1 worst character in the game. And that's more or less due to one thing about him. He's a melee-focused character. You can't use the fireman to your advantage by aiming at a fireplace and setting the machine on fire. More or less though, you can't actually do that to yourself since they both play very differently. If you just use your hammer attack at a fireplace to get to the chest, you just set yourself on fire. And no, you can't set the grass on fire if you are on fire. But when I went back to do a second playthrough, I started to absolutely love playing as him. In fact, I think he has a bigger advantage than the other 3 characters. He hits hard as Tears' projectiles, but he can pretty much move out of the firing site much quickly with his attack. The only disadvantage that he has is setting off an explosive that an enemy is holding and not using the firearms to deal extra damage. But his huge damage output and his far attack range makes up for his small shortcomings, and with his advantages, makes him the best character in the game.
Ah, you think too much. Sometimes you just gotta relax. Breathe. Eat a donut. You should try one. It's from the donut.
Julian is a hungry world. It can eat you alive. And to prove it, here's my tier list of all the playable characters. Although I'm gonna move Tirsa to a lower ranking. There. Alright, perfect. Lego Horizon, 6 out of 10. Yeah, sadly, the game is not really great. Pacing problems, character that plays better or worse, bad optimizations, boring level designs, the same environment you see constantly, and an overpriced game that should have been $30. And worst of all, Sony's second biggest failure this year. That shows how incompetent Sony is thinking that a game like this would even be as successful. Yeah, and that pretty much proves how good Astro Ball will stand the test of time. And it especially shows how big corporations that fund Nintendo-style games will always win, and not this Lego garbage that has piss-poor optimization. However, despite showing all of the cracks of the game, and show how much it fails in most aspects, despite its flaws, I actually still like it. I mean, I don't see it as a good game, far from it, but I actually enjoyed my time with it. And I'm so glad I decided to give Horizon an experiment with a simple Lego game. And that's the thing, they did not pull it off on the first try. Sony and the Lego company had some meddling with the marketing, the development time, and gave it a premium price for a 6-hour-long game. But I'm glad they got the devs to try something unique. Taking a somewhat mature game that is rated T for teen, adapting it into a Lego game, and marketing it to the younger audiences who enjoy video games. And even if you don't like it and see it as mid, you should still look at it with some positives and look at what should be improved and what needs to be removed. Or you could just treat this game like the next Concord and make fun of the devs who made the game. Yeah, that could work out too. Okay, so if there's anything that I want to say about how everyone online reacted to the failure of Lego Horizon, I'd say that it's odd. Like, okay, so we all know that Sony was trying to hype up this live service game named Concord, yet there was so much that went wrong that pretty much became the biggest failure in gaming history. Most of the factors for its failure is a lot of things. A live service game, even though it's oversaturated in the modern day. Game costs $40 and not free to play. Hundreds of millions of dollars lost in the development of the game. Poor marketing of the game, and yet expected this to last for years and enough money to support it. Character designs that bland and mediocre. Marvel levels of bad writing, and pretty much bad management at the game studio Firewalk. All of these problems combined into the travesty we called Concord. And now this game has the label of everything wrong with modern Sony, and why Sony has lost its magic ever since the PS3. Yet even then, Sony wasn't even part of the project to begin with. There's like a huge untold story that so many people don't even know about. Probably Monsters, a company that hasn't even shipped a game in their entire existence, was in charge of the project up until they decided to sell the team and the Concord license to Sony in April of 2023. But like, that's a story too complicated for me to talk about in this video. And if I went full in depth about the development of the game in this video, I'm pretty much just gonna start losing track and then won't be able to get back to the review of the game. Concord didn't even stand out of the crowd. Overwatch and Marvel Rivals shows that good character design is very important for a live service game to succeed. And Concord proves that if you just get lazy with the character designs, just create a random character without thinking about the character's body weight, their personality, their traits, etc., don't be surprised when your audience label these as like the worst character design in all of gaming history. Not because they're bad or awful or unfunny. There's nothing to talk about, nothing bad to talk about, or anything good or memorable. Each design in the character is just the same character in the original game, in Lego form, but a game that performed worse than Concord at launch, that would never actually be the thing that I would expect on my bingo card. But there are counterparts to the argument that others would say it was expected that a Lego game would flop. Number 1, the price. Others say that it's overpriced and is only like 5 hours long. The game should have costed around $20 to $30 at maximum for the entire package. I actually played the game before and recorded some footage for a video I was trying to make before 2025. But unfortunately, I decided to delete the recording because I didn't think I needed that. Although on my first playthrough, I felt the game was a little longer, like around 6 to 7 hours. But I do agree that the game should have been cheaper. But my guess is that the team who worked in the game felt like they put a lot of effort into making the game look as good as it can get, trying to emulate the same style and feeling like the Lego movie did. And from what I've seen, they actually did a good job with what they had, just not enough to make the gameplay engaging in its entirety. The game's optimization is fucking horrid. You need an 8GB VRAM to play on the recommended settings. This one part is what I have to 100% agree upon. Nintendo is the only company that is the king of optimization and reducing the game's file size. Companies are getting too lazy to optimize for people who are on lower end specs. What's worse is that most of the games are consistently using the processor more than the graphics card that can actually help with the game running better. Yet even worse, GPUs and hardware companies are also getting lazier as well. Oh my god, Horizon again? Why the fuck are they pushing this stupid ass franchise? We literally got like the sequel in 2022. Why do we have like a Lego game and then a Horizon game last year? Plus they even released a Horizon Zero Dawn remaster when it shouldn't even fucking need it. Who's making these decisions? Yeah, I could understand why people would get upset. From what I can hear, did not think that the story was good enough to be compelling, which made them unable to connect with Aloy, the main character of the game. And with the announcement of a couple of games releasing around 2 years in a row, people are pretty much gonna get sick and tired of wanting to see any new information about the games in the franchise. In fact, LEGO Horizon Adventure, as I previously stated before, it's just a retelling of the first game. But unfortunately, LEGO Horizon pretty much released at the worst time because there was actually a remaster that was releasing in October that year. And with the game pretty much releasing on November 14th with a $60 price tag, it was pretty much shown that it was the worst time to actually release another Horizon game. And with that, LEGO Horizon only had a peak of around 429 players during the launch on Steam. It sucks to be honest, but at the same time, you can't really blame people for not knowing that there was a LEGO Horizon game during that year. Could the game be better? Yeah, it could have, but I don't believe that it should have not tried to begin with. There were mistakes, but I think they could actually do better though if they were given a chance to do a sequel. And that's the most compliment that I can give to the team. Yeah, I know that I started the video off with a game that is divisive, and others will be questioning on why starting a mid-platformer game is a good idea. But I think it's best to start with something that had trouble and did not work for the first time. But I kinda recommend it to the other people who are interested in playing the game to try it out right now. I mean, I like the game despite its flaws. And others who pretty much came to this video or are interested in the game might actually like it as much as I would. I mean, the game has Sackboy in there. I'm not too sure how LBP fans feel when their favorite baby doll was locked behind a digital deluxe edition of the game. But there's a costume. Actually, speaking of baby dolls, Sackboy, A Big Adventure is the LBP franchise's first time adapting the gameplay into a 3D platformer. Unlike Horizon, I'm very familiar with the series. I was only able to get into the series around the mid-2011s, which was the perfect time to get into the series like everyone else. I love the fun 2D platforming in the levels, the fun mechanics, and the vehicles they introduce in the future game, and especially the silly character that builds up the world of Little Big Planet. It's pretty much a game engine that you pay to make your own levels, and this series is built on this community-made content in the game. Back in the day, you could play a random level made by a professional level designer who knows the level editor so well, and also play a very basic level made by someone who just got into the game and pretty much used the stuff he used in the game's campaign. This is how this franchise was so beloved to this day, and with a great fun game with online features, most people in the community were asking, when would the franchise go into 3D? Well, they kinda did that with karting. And that's all I had to say on that. But what a big surprise! Finally, in the mid-2020s during the reveal of the PlayStation 5, we finally got the first ever 3D platformer revealed, and it was released on November 12th of that year. And this was what we wanted! A level created in 3D, starring Sackboy in a definitive game for everyone to get PS5 what? Wait, hold on a second. Wait, hang on. What? What do you mean there's no level editor? What? But you can't give us an LBP game but not including the biggest feature that made the franchise? What do you mean just play Dreams? Okay, Sackboy A Big Adventures is unfortunately a single-player focused platformer game where the only online component is the co-op system. And despite the fact that the community would be going all in onto this game, it unfortunately sold 1.4 million units in total, especially on old platforms. This is so deflating. A 3D platformer sold worse than the 2D games? It's so conflicting. Platformers around 2017 suddenly took a rise, and everybody had been consistently making videos on 3D platformers. And if we're going by sales, the 3D games always get greater numbers compared to the 2D ones. Kirby's highest selling game in the franchise was Kirby's Dream Land, and the Forgotten Land just beat in the game in sales. Yet Sackboy's first ever 3D game flopped? How is it that a game which was easily accessible on PS4, PS5, and a PC port that came out 2 years later is still considered the worst selling mainline game in the series' history? While many contenders pointed out that the game is so similar to Mario 3D World, which was only playable on the Wii U at the time before it was released on the Switch. Reviewers at the time considered it a fun and good game, while others considered it mediocre since the gameplay was not very engaging. Even others say that the level design is not good due to the slow movement of Sackboy, and not even including a sprint button aside from the rolling move that helps you speed up. Others even pointed out that the inputs weren't even registering in the right time during the challenge runs. Plus, others even said that it feels like the level design in this one doesn't even live up to the quality of 3D World. I also felt the same way like the others when I played this game back on the PlayStation 4. I wasn't having a good time with it either. Plus, I didn't even get to finish my first playthrough of the game until 4 years later. I felt nothing after I finally finished it. Yet at the end of 2024, I had an impulse to get in the game again on PC, and so I tried it again with my DualSense controller and a beefy PC. And so I am wondering why I'm playing it again if I didn't like it before. I was probably thinking to myself, okay, my first playthrough was not great. Maybe if I started all over again, I might actually enjoy it a little more than how I did it on my first playthrough. And so I started another playthrough, and this time I got all the achievements on Steam. It wasn't a save process completed again, but at least it was much more tolerable than Crash Course completionist requirements. But like, what about the base game? Wasn't it even good? Did I waste money on the same game again on PC? Was all the complaints on the game justified? No. it was absolute cinema. Sackboy: A Big Adventure is a masterpiece of a 3D platformer game that finally clicked with me. I was having a joy from start to finish. Every level is masterfully crafted. The world of the Imagisphere is so beautiful. The craziest thing is that this was running on a 7-year-old PlayStation 4. The PS5 was only released in a few weeks. Yet, this game is like if Mario 3D World got a sequel and they used their talents to make the best looking game ever made. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. The game starts off in a small town and there's loads of Sack villagers, including you enjoying the peaceful day of your life. Well, that was until one big evil jester named Vex comes out of the Gmod skybox, kidnaps all the Sack folks, and explains he's taking people hostage to build his ultimate project to take over the Imagisphere by getting slaves to build the topsy-turvy just so he could get rid of everyone else's ideas, only have his creation called the Uproar to be the only thing to exist. And so you, Sackboy, escaped Vex and flies to different worlds and meets this elder Sack folk named Scarlet, who gives you a mission to collect loads of the Dreamer Orbs to stop him and his dangerous weapon. Now, as you can tell, the game's level structure takes the idea like 3D World. Linear 3D levels with a little bit more movement options. But speaking of actually playing both games, Sackboy plays so much differently than 3D World ever did. I mean, 3D World's a lot faster than A Big Adventures due to the larger levels and how that game is structured to that of the 3D version of the 2D Mario games. A Big Adventures is pretty much like a 3D version of the Little Big Planet games. Just unlike those games, it controls so much differently than it did before. There's a good amount of familiar stuff for fans who played the older games, but there are a bunch of new stuff that is not familiar, but it still feels like it's part of the Little Big Planet universe. You got a slap attack that can defeat enemies, including the big bosses that we'll get into later on. The roll ability that makes you a little faster, but there are even tunnels that you can use to slip into to get to secret areas, or even slip into the next part of the level. And if you hit a roll and an attack button at once, you can activate his spin ability. Keep in mind, it would just stun enemies instead of defeating them. Sackboy has a ground pound that you can use to eliminate enemies with, but you can also activate switching and pass through these cloud platforms. And last but not least, the grab. A move that was actually carried over from the older games. You could just hold an item or an enemy in your hand and like throw it in an arc, which can be used for pressing switches or tossing an object on a higher ledge. But the grab is also used to hang on to the sponge materials for platforming challenges. And Sackboy's moveset is not the only thing they focus on for platforming challenges. There are even gadgets that are used to include even more platforming challenges. Gadgets are a staple ever since Little Big Planet 2 with fun and effective ideas for how you can use them. This game is no exception. The grapple hook from Little Big Planet 2 is here in 3D. It's used to grab objects from further away, but also used to grab onto the spongy platformers that you can't reach. Useful for any platforming challenge that comes your way. The boomerang is next. And at first, it looks just like a long-range weapon that hits enemies from farther away and destroys objects that your Sackboy can't reach. But later on, they find useful ways for the boomerang, like activating a mechanism that makes you lose your boomerang, but it opens a door or disable hazard in the environment. Plus, there's even blue goo that if you throw at them, you teleport to where the goo is. And it's useful in a very clever way later in the game. And the last one is the jetpack boots and the mechanical gloves combo. It lets you fly in the air and shoot projectiles at enemies far away. It doesn't get as creative as the last two, but they still find a way to make a fun challenge with the gadget in mind. They got as many ideas that they can use for each ability, gadget, and the obstacle to make a cleverly well-made level that absolutely puts so much use for everything they can think of. The levels are massively crafted and feel like the actual place in the game's world. The environments are if you make cool set pieces with the stuff from your house, like tissues, toilet papers, rugs, carpets, and other materials from the real world. That's the problem with most of Mario's games, especially 3D World. The levels from the game feel like it doesn't even feel like they crafted a level that is also a fun obstacle, but also an actual environment that is still part of the world. It mostly feel like it was made in a level editor and just an obstacle course that just goes from point A to point B, with the typical Mario stuff that is on a checklist. But even then, it's not actually bad. there are some excellent level designs. They are not memorable enough to distinguish one another, like one snow level in another world from another snow level in a different world. But Sackboy: A Big Adventures does have excellent level design and memorable environment. In fact, there's a level where you ride in a tray for its entirety, and you have to avoid obstacles, bombs, defeat enemies, and make sure you don't fall off. But the best levels of the entire game are the music levels. Unfortunately, I can't play the levels with the songs since copyright on YouTube is a bitch, and I don't want to get the video blocked all over the world. But the levels are synced with the music and the environment, and enemies flows with the beat of the song very well. You don't stay to the beat of the song itself, but you have to be aware of your environment by avoiding the obstacles from the beat of the song. You don't go to the beat of the song itself, but you still have a great time playing it. But it wouldn't be a Little Big Planet game if you can't customize your Sackboy. And the good news is, the game still has customization. You go into Tsum Tsum's clothing store, the only recognizable character from Little Big Planet 3, and you have a huge option of clothing that you could choose. Although the problem I had with the store is the currency that are used and how much you need to get them. The collectibles are as followed: the series staples, score bubbles, and prize bubbles. The score bubbles are literally what they do. The prize bubbles reward you with clothing, emotes, and skins to those who can search for them. Although prize bubbles are not the only way to earn outfits. There's even a score system that nets your outfits as you get a higher rank. Bells mostly, but there are also outfits that you have to get through silver or gold medals. The Dreamer Orbs act like the gold star coins in the new Super Mario Bros. Games, but mostly the green stars from 3D World that you have to collect to progress in the game. And finally, the cat bells. These things are the main collectible of the game. These appear in the levels, but are not as plentiful as the score bubbles. You have to go out of your way by pulling strings, destroying obstacles, killing enemies, the Ninja Night Trials, and Tsum Tsum's cat bells bonus stages. But the problem is that I have with the bells, they are not as plentiful, and the prices for the costumes are very expensive, and you pretty much waste all your currency on a couple of outfits. And if you want to play the cat bell bonus stages, you have to pretty much collect all the prize bubbles, all the Dreamer Orbs, and ace the entire level. And for the levels, you only got like 20 seconds to collect enough bells. And there are only different types of stages in each world. There are literally worlds that have better bonus stages, and there are other bonus stages that feel like I just worked free overtime. But like even then, that's just like a completionist problem. The outfits are still awesome to wear. There are so many types to pick and choose from in the store, but many don't even know that there is different animation that you could get in the store too that lets you set to a directional button. Mostly in the older games, the directional button was just set to just 4 different facial animations. Up is for happy, down is sad, left is scared, and right is angry. But in this game, you could actually set it to 4 different emotions and had an animation to play either in the levels or at the end of the stage. They even released some DLC later down the line based on PlayStation and other third-party IPs, including a costume from an indie game called Toem. But most of all, they even brought back a legendary skin from the PSP game, and that is the banana costume. And yes, the legendary dance is also in the game as well.
I will now perform my people's native dance.
I do the hustle. There's even a co-op mode in the game, but I haven't really gotten into it because I don't have any friends who owns the game. But from what I heard from people who actually played both this and 3D World's multiplayer mode, Sackboy's co-op mode is so much better and it's not a chaotic nightmare to play with friends. Plus, there's actually co-op exclusive levels that you can play. Just don't play the levels for completionist's sake. Just only focus the mainline levels and then you'll be golden. You explore really fun levels, collect orbs, smack a bunch of enemies, and help the resident of each area from Vex's minions. Each king/queen of every world you visit are full of personality. Mama Monkey, who rules the entire jungle kingdom with his monkey children. King Booga, who rules over the seas and explores the depths to find unknown treasures that he displays in a museum. And Naomi, who has her computer data a little screwy, but I'm sure that's not serious and we're always showing her trying to murder us at the end. Oh, god damn it! But there's even one character that you can actually find in your journey named General Strotokov. You first meet him in a level where you're asked to herd a group of Screwless back to the pen. But you can find him in different levels off the beaten path where he offers you a Dreamer Orb, if you're willing to listen to his research. But nothing comes close to the main antagonist of the game, Vex. You know, the bringer of nightmares, master of the uproar. He's just a mischievous main villain, taunting you on your journey to stop him and saving your friends. Vex's minions are also causing a ruckus, bringing chaos all over the Imagisphere. The boss fights in this game are also very good. You do fight Vex 4 times in the game, which 3 of them are the same fights on a conveyor belt, in a bone machine, in a dirty swamp, in a box under the stairs in the corner of the basement, half block street from Jerry's Space Shop. You know the place. And there's like only 2 mini bosses in the game, which are much powerful bear enemies that you fight in the older levels. And for the other levels, you actually fight the bosses in the end of the game. Aside from like Vex, there's one that is a worm boss fight where you have to use your boomerang to take out his weak point and avoid falling off a cliff. And Naomi, who transforms into a murderous computer machine where you have to use the mechanics of the world by activating the switches on the screen floor projection and destroying the viruses that Vex ejected into her. Vex is a little bit more intimidating and appears more frequently than Bowser ever did in most of the Mario games. Although saying that, when it feels like it's almost the end of the game, Vex actually pretty much does something similar to what Bowser did in 3D World. Vex reveals that he dropped the plans for you and also waited for you to collect the Dreamer Orb so he could steal most of them from you to power his Topsy Turbo. Just like how Bowser waited for you to rescue all the Pixie Fairies so he could steal all of them again and use them to build his ultimate casino world. And the final Vex fight is no joke. The best boss fight ever in the game. You have to dodge incoming obstacles, throw bombs at Vex to stun him and land a lot of hits. He even goes full wall breaking by stealing half of your life, so you have to go into danger to get him back. And after beating his first phase, you have one platforming challenge to go through before you can finally fight him again, just like last time. And that platforming challenge is very tricky. But unlike Vex's first phase, during the halfway point in the boss fight, 2 platforms disappear and you have to be aware of your surroundings so you don't fall off. Plus, Vex will actually drop off the bombs out of the sky and pretty much you won't be able to throw it at him. But you can actually still get an early attack on him and actually defeat a specific enemies that is textured differently. And so, we finally beat Vex, stop the Topsy Turbo, save the Imagisphere, and Scarlet dubs you the next Ninja Knight. And everybody celebrates. The end. And that is Sackboy, A Big Adventure. It's a really good game. It has a compelling story for the younger audience, it has creative level design with the best visuals ever on a weak hardware, and co-op is the best part of the game. It's almost as good as 3D World. Or maybe it's even better than 3D World? Okay, I'm not actually gonna rule that out just yet though. I'm just gonna give this game an 8 out of 10. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a really good 3D platformer game. It's just that people are gonna resonate more with 3D World than Sackboy Big Adventure. But it's still one of my favorite games out of this franchise. Excellent level design, great co-op, and most of all, a really beautiful looking game for the system. Well, actually, both of the soundtracks in the game are very good. Yes, even the ones that are not licensed music. Yet despite all of that, why is it that this game is getting hatred and disdain in the Little Big Planet community? Why is it that with every merchandise with the Sackboy Big Adventure name, it is given scrutiny? And even with the game, why is it that it sold only 1.5 million units when it was released at the beginning of the PS5? Why is it that it's getting ignored by everyone and even has a big disdain from everyone and not seen as a game that can stand close to Super Mario 3D World? Well, you see, here's the thing. It's not that people hate it. It's not that the game didn't bother to include a level editor in the game. It was not because there was another game that overshadowed Sackboy called Dreams. Mostly, it's what happened to the Little Big Planet series after Sackboy was released. The Little Big Planet series is reliant on its online servers and its community to keep the games running. And we all know what happens to a game where a company announces the shutdown of the servers for the game. It's pretty much dead. and you had to rely on community-made servers to keep playing online. It was a tragedy when Little Big Planet 3 on PS4, which was the last game that had servers still up, was started to have server issues around January of 2024. And when we all thought that Sony was going to try to fix the problems of the servers, it turns out that they made a difficult decision to shut down the servers on April 19th. It was so devastating on that day for the Little Big Planet community. And everyone was so upset that Sony had killed the series and left it to die. I was also pretty sad that the servers had been shut down. Not just because the levels from the past 13 years were lost to time, but more or less, I didn't actually have a deeper connection with the online community. Listen, I'm a big fan of Little Big Planet. I've played all 3 of the mainline games, minus the PSP and the Vita spin-offs, but I've spent hours on the campaigns of all the games. The Little Big Planet 2's campaign is my favorite one, and my favorite memory of it is getting all the aces on all the levels. It was a tough challenge, but I have conquered it, and I have conquered it in my most favorite game of the series. But I barely got into the community-made levels since I live in the countryside and the internet was very shit. And I was young at the time, so I couldn't even make a PSN account until years later. And even then, I still haven't gotten deep into the community-made levels. So with this announcement and the Little Big Planet 3 servers shutting down on PS4, I was very surprised that a huge amount of people, like big creators, actually cared about Little Big Planet. Cause this wasn't even the first and last time that the servers got shut down. You see, around the late 2020s, there has been hackers that were messing with the servers on the first and second games since the security was so easy to bypass. And despite the fact that this was going on, only a small amount of the Little Big Planet community were even addressing the server attacks that were happening. Even big channels who tried their best to get Sony to fix the servers, this still wasn't enough to stop the hackers. And unfortunately, Sony made a difficult decision to shut down the servers of Little Big Planet 1, 2, and 3 on PS3 in early of 2021. But the servers for Little Big Planet 3 on PS4 were still up. There is still a glimmer of hope because all the levels from the first, second, and third game on PS3 were still on the PS4 servers and people could keep playing it for years to come. Well, unfortunately that didn't last for very long. But like even then, I think the fanbase would at least still giving this game a chance. But like why is it still getting ignored? Just label it as a mediocre game. What was it that didn't work for the fan base? What is the one biggest flaw that prevents it from being considered the best of the 3D platformers, and one that could actually be standing toe to toe with Mario? Well, let's compare another spin-off game to another series that is relying on its online community. Around July of 2025, Nintendo just shadow dropped the trailer for a campaign-focused Splatoon spin-off game called Raiders. They don't have a release date for the game, but the hype for it was so high and everybody in the community is still excited for the game. But there is actually one problem with the game. This is only exclusive to the Switch 2. Yeah, there's no mainline Splatoon installment. Splatoon 3 was already released on the Switch, and with no news of a mainline game to be released on the new system, this is the only game that fans are getting until then. Yet, Splatoon 2 and 3 are still playable on Switch 2. In fact, they actually run better on the new hardware. Fans are still playing those two games even to this day. And fans are coming to this game with open arms despite not having a mainline game on there. Now I know all you are asking, what does this have to do with Sackboy: A Big Adventure? Well, you see, both of these series are iconic for its online functionality and its community-made content to keep the games afloat. I mean, Raiders and Sackboy still had hype around this announcement. Yet the Splatoon community is praising Raiders and looking forward to it, while the Little Big Planet fans are looking forward to it, yet ignored it, even to this day. But when you decided to look up how long the fans had to wait for these games to be released, you start to understand what happened to the hype of both games. Splatoon 3 was also a big hit, selling around 10 million units in total and still growing. That's an impressive sale market. Little Big Planet 3 is the highest selling game in the franchise, and it sold over 5 million units in total. Now 5 million is half of Splatoon 3, but it's still big. But we have to consider the release date for both of these mainline games before the spin-offs release. Splatoon 3 was released in September 2022, and if you measured how long fans theoretically had to wait for Raiders, they had to wait around 3 to 4 years. It's a long time, But it's safe to say that fans didn't have to wait for a long time for a spin-off game to release before the mainline game. And it's safe to say that this new spin-off game is also going to be a big success as the mainline games. That's very impressive. Now, Little Big Planet 3 released in November 2014. How long did Little Big Planet fans have to wait for Sackboy Big Adventure? Oh no! 6 years? This is ridiculous! Now, some may see it and say that it's not as ridiculously long as other games like Mario Kart World, Half-Life 2, and the new Ratchet and Clank game that is set to release in 2029. But 6 years is still a long time to wait! That's pretty much half a decade for the new game to be released. If with no news of a mainline Little Big Planet game for PS5, and with dreams seemingly too complicated for any general fans who just want to make a random level in the game, this game got tossed into the trash for the rest of the community, only picked up by a small number of Little Big Planet fans or YouTubers, which pretty much gave this game a try and ended up loving it, just like me. But what's even worse, Super Mario 3D Worlds got a Switch port in 2021 months after Sackboy released. And that was given big praise by the community for how good the game is. It even had a little small open world side game that is super fun despite how short it is. Sackboy released on PS4 and PS5 on October of 2020. I mean, it was actually a good version of the game, yet nobody actually cared for it. And what's worse, this game got a full-blown PC port years later. Yet, this game had a lot of problems on PC. You've seen Digital Foundry's coverage on the PC port and saw how awful it ran on launch. It had improvements over the versions on the PS4 and PS5, but like problems started to arise. There was stuttering, the frame dropped, and the camera started to get a little jumpy that confused people and made it look like the game was actually running at half the frame rate. And it turns out the only fix for it was to limit the frame rate to 60 FPS. But luckily enough, the game got a lot of updates to fix all the problems that played the game on launch. But like even then, for people who didn't actually get a chance to play the game, it pretty much gave them a horrible first impression of the game. If people's first experience of something was fucking horseshit, they mostly won't even want to actually try it out on PC. First experience is important for a new audience. While it's not actually going to be people's first experience with the game since it released on other systems, but they're pretty much other people who don't actually got the recommended systems to play it. But they do have a PC that is powerful enough to play most games that were released around the early 2020s, and they pretty much wanted to play on a more convenient system that they actually own. And so, with that, they pretty much are going to ignore the awful PC port, even after all the fixes. That makes me so sad. This game couldn't have been praised as one of the best platformer games of all time. Yet despite all that, it will never be praised. It will never get the praise of the levels of Mario, Crash, Spyro, Banjo, and other beloved platformer games. And that is a reality that I unfortunately will have to accept for the rest of my life. But like at the same time, I actually am making a video on the game. So like, oh, you should seriously play it right now. It's so fucking awesome. I don't care. It's still great. Okay, for the last game on this list, we're going to be ending this with a bang. The cream of the crop. The pinnacle of platforming perfection. A third-person shooter mixed with platforming elements as the gameplay. And a very compelling story from a franchise that hasn't been the same since 2010. And that is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart!
Get off me, ship! Creature! Don't you think it's weird to throw a celebration for us?
You okay, Bolts?
I mean, we haven't done anything heroic in years.
If it's broke, the fixer'll fix it.
Wow.
Hero stuff!
Can't anyone print instruction manuals anymore?
Yeah, it's a masterpiece. I'm giving this one 9 out of 10 already. Yeah, that's it. Okay, here's a little backstory on me. I grew up with the PS2 and the GBA during my early years of gaming. My first game was Pokemon Leaf Green on the GBA. A good introduction into Pokemon, but my first console game was Ratchet & Clank Going Commando on the PS2. And thanks to that game, I got to try out the first game, and then the third game, and then Deadlock. and that's where I became a PlayStation fan. I've played every Ratchet & Clank installment in its entire history, minus the Secret Agent Clank and the Java phone game. I mean, I was around the single digits. I wasn't even allowed to have a flip phone. But this franchise to me was my Mario for PlayStation. I still play the other games that PlayStation released. I was able to still play Nintendo's own games on the Nintendo DS as well. But then I finally got my first ever Nintendo console called the Wii, and I finally played a couple of Mario games on there. But even then, nothing from the 2000 and 2010 will ever hit my childhood nostalgia like PlayStation did. Except for Kirby. That is just one exception. Ratchet & Clank is a third-person shooter and a platformer game that stayed the same ever since the second one. The first one is so different from the others, but it's still one of my favorite games ever. This franchise has been alive for at least 19 years in total, and it's a big surprise that Insomniac is still keeping this franchise alive for a long time, even though most of the team who made the other series like Sly Cooper and the Jak and Daxter series pretty much ended those series in their own terms, or just abandoned it because they didn't like where this franchise is going. Although you pretty much know what happens to long-running franchises that keeps going for years to come. The franchise pretty much become a shell of itself, getting better worse in most areas, whether it's the story of the games, new gameplay, or mechanics that pretty much are awful, and a very rushed development of the games. Normally, the new future games are not actually bad though. It's just that the newer games in the series started to be plagued with all these problems. And with all those problems, one game pretty much solidifies everything wrong with how the franchise is continuing in the modern day. One game pretty much solidifies all the problems that made the old fans feel jaded and unhappy to where Insomniac took this franchise. And that is Ratchet & Clank on PS4. Although, on the surface, this actually looks not so bad. It plays so great, the visuals and the controls are pretty much perfected as a Ratchet & Clank game can get. It also recreates a bunch of old levels from the PS2 game with new original levels. And it has a production level that is the same as some modern video games and movies. But when you actually start digging in deeper to the game, this game is the most hated Ratchet & Clank game to ever exist. Doesn't even matter if there's actually Ratchet & Clank games that are worse than this. Cause this series started out as a mockery towards capitalism, celebrities, and even corporations. And now, look at what happened to this series in the modern day. Getting commercialized, making meta jokes that 6-year-olds will laugh at, a story so generic that I'd rather watch a Disney movie instead, a bunch of random generic characters voiced by celebrities that people will never care about, outdated references that make you want to shit out of your entire organs, and worst of all, becoming the thing that they mocked at in the past.
They even have the Mega Limited Ultra Edition of Intransigence Fall of Blarg.
That one comes with exclusive content if you pre-ordered through Gadgetron.
Everything that Ratchet & Clank built up to be is now unrecognizable, just so they can market it to a mainstream film for general audiences. Unfortunately, it didn't work out as they intended. Well, unless you're talking about the game, because it took oversized matters sales numbers. And with how Insomniac was putting their efforts into a Spider-Man game for PS4, it was the best-selling game that they ever made in years, which made the PS4 game a sign of the franchise that ended on a sad whimper, no longer becoming the iconic series that Insomniac is remembered for. And now, this company is going to be the Spider-Man devs for years to come, and Ratchet & Clank has just been thrown into the trash, just like with Sly Cooper, Jak and Daxter, Ape Escape, and many other old PlayStation franchises. Well, that was until during a PS5 console showcase where, out of nowhere, a trailer for a space adventure game was revealed, and we didn't even know what it was going to be about, or what the game is called. Until Ratchet & Clank came out of a dimensional portal and rode on a bug and was flying through a dimensional world and ended up separated again. And then, out of nowhere, at the end, a female Lombax comes out of nowhere, and then Ratchet & Clank ripped apart. For the first time ever since the PS3, we're finally getting a Ratchet & Clank game releasing 1 year after, and it was gonna be awesome. However, there are actually still people who kept their expectations low, while others are even skeptical. The fans were so happy that Ratchet & Clank was still alive, but even then, others still felt like that this is gonna fall into the same trappings of the PS4 game. There are still biases in the community as well, especially the big creators. So with the months rolling by and with June 2021 coming close, the game finally released on PS5. Now here comes the biggest questions. Did the game actually deliver? Were the fans right to be hyped for it? Did the game fall into the same trappings like the 2016 game? Were all these skeptics and doubts about the game justified? Well, you see, Rift Apart? Oh, it was so good. Everyone, this game pretty much blew all of the old Ratchet & Clank games out of the water. The story? Emotional and compelling. The characters? Absolutely written so much better than it did in the old games. Twists and turns that nobody has saw coming. A much more capable recurrent villain. New levels assigned that actually is very engaging. New mechanics that open up the way for platforming and combat. The game has so many secrets that you could go out of the way to get, and there's barely any in-depth videos on Rift Apart. Not even after Astrobot released. And that breaks my heart so much, 'cause I see the light! Or I almost wouldn't have. I mean, I was still hyped for the game, but my fears and worries about how the game would turn out was not too different to other fans who felt the same way. Here, tell me if you had the same thoughts before Rift Apart release. I said it before, but Ratchet & Clank 2016 felt more like a game trying to pander to an audience that probably won't even care about the game or even remember it a year after they played it. So for a bunch of old fans who were so jaded after the 2016 game, in their eyes, Rift Apart doesn't seem like a game they're very interested in, or a game that actually will bring them back to the series. And even then, I was even thinking the same thing as well. I was so happy that Ratchet & Clank is still alive and well. Yet at the same time, I was feeling that I wasn't really wanting a Ratchet & Clank for the PS5. Especially if it turns out that this game is pretty much short and it's gonna be the only game for the system. Especially since every single game is getting released on PC, my interest in wanting the PS5 pretty much dwindled downward. I still had a little tiny hope that I could get a PS5 just to play Rift Apart. Well, at least I would have if it weren't for the scalpers. Cause you all know when pre-orders were available for the console, scalpers were able to scalp them so easily. And we all know that the scalpers use the second-hand market to price these PS5s to a ridiculous amount of money that nobody can afford at the time due to the pandemic. And I know there are a couple of people who will be asking, but Luke, there actually were sales numbers to show that Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart sold very well. There's nothing even to worry about. Ratchet & Clank is doing fine. And yeah, that is really true though. Ratchet & Clank is very profitable than it was in the 2010s. But like, are there actually videos going in depth about the weapon selections, the mechanics, the platforming, the storytelling, and pretty much everything else in between? From what I looked up on big YouTubers, or at least smaller YouTubers, I barely see any of them. And most YouTubers that are mostly into platformers only talked about Astrobot, not even Ratchet & Clank, and not even Sackboy itself. And mostly the newest videos though that I've seen are pretty much just the 2016 game in the PS2 series. I hate to actually say this though, but the buzz around Rift Apart was nothing on the same level that the 2016 game got. And even when the game finally released in June of 2021, the conversation about it became less of how good the game is and how to redeem Ratchet & Clank, and more or less who actually got a PS5 to play it. Truthfully, my interest in wanting a PS5 to play Rift Apart pretty much went down the drain. I mean, why try to get a console with a couple of games I want to play when I could just play my backlog on PC? And so, I think I made my decision final. I won't be able to play Rift Apart, and I'm just gonna look up some videos on YouTube, just spoiling myself. Until in May of 2023, when PlayStation dropped this out of nowhere. And so, I waited till July 23rd, and finally got the game on Steam. But now, 2 years has passed since the PC port. What do I think about it right now? Well, I got 67 hours on the game. and I think you all should play it right now. Like, this Ratchet & Clank game is nothing like the other games from the PS3 era, to a point where it's actually a different game for the better. And there's one thing you should take away from this video. That's it. They made a game with a story that is for longtime fans of the PS2 games, and a game for newcomers who aren't familiar with the series, but thanks to a new storyline starring two new protagonists, Rivet and Kit. Rivet is a Lombax of the dimension, and is a part of the Resistance trying to defeat the Emperor, who is ruler of the entire galaxy. While our heroes, Ratchet and Clank, are given a big celebration hosted by Quark, Skit, and PT. Well, Clank too, but we'll get to there. Ratchet is pretty concerned to celebrate since it's been like around 8 years and he doesn't even want to show his face to the public. But Clanks assure him that everything's gonna be okay and nothing will go wrong. Well, everything did went well until goons for less started to raid the party. And worst of all, Clank's special gift to Ratchet is to repair Dimensionator so he could find his family and his kind. Despite the fact that Dimensionator was actually causing problems with our heroes before. And then, Dr. Nefarious steals the Dimensionator and causes mischief with it so he could find a dimension where he always wins. And things go very well! And now, Clank is stuck with Rivet. Ratchet is all by himself, and the entire group's mission is to find enough parts and tools to build another Dimensionator so both Ratchet and Clank can get back home. And yeah, River Arm did that while I was done with one of the missions in the circuit. She went back to normal after that, don't worry. Meanwhile, Ratchet stumbles into another character who he names Kit, and they both team up together until Ratchet reunites with Clank at Circuits to build another Dimensionator. And that's the plot of the game. It's not complicated, but not too simple. And I think they executed it very well. And it actually has a few twists and turns that I never expected. We'll get into that soon. But for now, how is the gameplay? Well, you go pew 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 pew, smash that, woo woo woo, blah blah blah. You blast through enemies like robots, goons, and insects as you explore through beautiful levels. You also have a selection of weapons, either normal or wacky. A bomb glove that actually deals extra damage after impact, and a drone that shoots bombs at enemies but also flies in a straighter line to where you aimed it. Then there are the ones that freezes enemies, and the one where you throw out fungi pellets that shoot at enemies. But my most favorite one is the one that acts like a minigun in most games, with a twist of the minigun shoot out a void that sucks in multiple enemies at once. The gameplay for it is very much the same as it was for 20 years. But I don't think that I would say that it was not polished if the team didn't absolutely perfected the gameplay in the 2016 PS4 game with their own game engine. Spider-Man was their magnum opus. It was their best game they have ever made for a long time. So with the talented team of Spider-Man, they were brought in to help with Rift Apart. You could tell which team from Insomniac worked on a Ratchet & Clank game. PS4 or the 2016 game was the old devs from the Future series' final game that they worked on. While Rift Apart is the new team's first Ratchet & Clank game, and it did it with the polish of Spider-Man. The platforming is so miraculously well designed as well as the combat. Swinging from hook shots, wall running above certain depth, dashing through enemies' attacks or shields, using a speeder to dash through acid and waters in huge levels, exploring the secret passages to find gold bolts, and using the game's main mechanic called rift tethering and rift jumping. With the addition of having a dash move and rift tethering gives the combat a little more difficulty, using the dash ability to avoid enemy attacks or hazards, while using the rift tethering to jump to a higher platform or to either reach an enemy far away where you can't reach. But moving to a different platform is not what your rift tethering ability will be doing, as you use it to enter through dimensional pockets and challenge yourself with small platforming challenges, either by using your gadgets, your brain, or sometimes you use your weapons to solve a platforming puzzle. You will also go through actual rifts and end up in another part of the level, either for a cinematic spectacle, a challenge, or either with a boss around 1/3 through the fight. But the game only does that sparingly, just at the beginning, 2 planets, and at a few points when it's almost at the end of the game. But my most favorite mechanic in the game is the dimensional crystals. Just swing your wrench or hammer at it, and then you're transported to another version of the same level. This was actually one of my favorite mechanics, since it gets used a lot more than rift jumping. In Bazaar Prime, you can actually switch to one version of the level that wasn't destroyed to traverse to another area and head back to the original area that was destroyed. One part that I absolutely love with this mechanic is where you're grind railing in the level and you have to hit the crystal to switch to your alternative dimension version of that grind rail challenge to progress. Or as another example, Cordelian. One of the spooky levels where you explore one of the Emperor's underwater factory, in which you explore an alternate dimension version where it looks abandoned and nobody's salvaging this place. That is until you found out that there's a biomorph named Juice hunting you down, and a robot named Junkbot who is taking care of this creature, despite the fact that it's attacking Junkbot. Yet, you come back to the same dimensional place that is fully optional, and after one misstep, you soon find out that Juice was being tortured for his bioelectricity. After that, you free him out of his prison, and he helps you escape this place, and he helps you with, wait, what the hell is he fucking doing? And so, both Juice 1 and Juice 2 powers up the Forge Machine to make another Dimensionator. Although, do you know what's so funny? I haven't even mentioned the music in the game, which is just so good. I know that there are a few contractors that still say that they wish they would bring back the way they made music in the older games, but I still think that the soundtrack is fantastic on its own. The main theme is pretty much my favorite one out of the game, but the visuals of this game, oh my god! It looks so beautiful. Like seriously, it almost looks like a beautiful painting made by a really professional artist. Although people still say that this game looks so unbearably ugly, especially since the game started to go for a somewhat realistic art style that pretty much are gonna start feeling outdated in the years to come. But you can't deny that the artist didn't actually try to make the game look as beautiful as it is, especially since it was released on the PS5. But, do I actually have problems with this game? Are there any flaws that makes this game not a 10 out of 10? Well, I kinda do have a few problems, so we'll start with the gameplay and then talk about the story. For the gameplay and content, I say I wish there was a little more in this game, like 2 more planets to explore with more golden bolts and rare titanium to collect, 3 new weapons in the game, and maybe a post-game for challenge mode. And I think this game has the easiest achievements to get than the other past Ratchet & Clank games, either on PS3 or PS4. The Dimensional Pocket area should have harder dimensional challenges that really test your brain and your platforming skills. A couple of old weapons like the Warmonger should have been replaced with new ones, or variants of the old weapons that have been barely in most games. And the Rhino is pretty much the most disappointing Rhino in the entire series, since its damage output is the worst one than any other Rhino that it doesn't even finish bossing in a couple of hits. And worst of all, its ammo capacity is the worst one than any other Rhino in the entire franchise. You pretty much have to collect a bunch of golden bullets to unlock the infinite ammo tree just so you can actually use the Rhino. I mean, like, the Rhino does have little cameos that they actually introduced from other series, but like, that's it. The Rhino 8 is very disappointing. Okay, now for the story of the game. I think that is the best story that Ratchet & Clank had in a long time. Pretty much ever since A Crack in Time and maybe Into the Nexus. One of the most prevalent characters in this story is Riven and Kit. Riven is part of the Resistance member who has doubted her ability to fight back against the dictator and the mindless followers who does everything they do to please their leader. She lives in a gelatonian factory with a bunch of animal species called the Morts. She never likes robots, it just does everything on her own, even with the Resistance. But later on, she actually tries to work with Clank when she finds out that Clank himself has another Lombax with him, while also trying to work with the group by finding the Dimensional Crystal from the Bassaro planet. And when the crystal gets destroyed after stopping the drill from destroying the alternative version of this planet, she suggests that both her and Clank head to another planet named Torn 5 to search for the fixer so that he can repair the crystal and we can get back on track. And thanks to the performance of Jennifer Hale, she makes her character feel more like a jaded person who doesn't like to interact with strangers, but she still cares about the people that had taken care of her, and she tries to help people who are in need, especially if there are robots. Meanwhile, Ratchet on his own visits the planet Savali to find an apprentice who is named Kit, because he needs to get to the archive so he can figure out how to build a Dimensionator. Although Ratchet needs to save a couple of grunks from Nefarious, and then he'll be able to get to the archives. Ratchet has gone through a lot of adventures, it's kind of been getting stale and has not gone anywhere. Ratchet trying to find his own Lombax race is a good premise, but Insomniac didn't even have a chance to cater to it for years to come. So they decided to do something a little bit different for Ratchet. For years, Ratchet has been saving the galaxy from evil threats, and he's so comfortable with the way things is. So when Clank offered him a closure to his quest by giving him an easy way to find his Lombax kinds, Ratchet has doubt in his dreams of meeting his race. He loves what he has done with the galaxy and is afraid of losing everyone he cares for, especially when Clank was there to help him for years since he was alone, not knowing what was out there in the galaxy. He even had doubts that his family is going to be very proud of him and his accomplishments. But despite all that, he still proceeds with the mission to get back home and find his race. And I think this game's portrayal of Ratchet was done so much better than any other game did. There isn't a lot to talk about Clank other than that he is a great partner with Rivet. Although Clank losing one of his arms in the beginning, it very much helped Rivet's character arc in a way that shows them both of their struggles, with them having problems, yet they still keep going until the very end. Plus, at the end of Torrent 5, where the Fixer is pretty much on the edge of killing Rivet and Clank improvises and told the Fixer that he was already fixed, because despite being broken, he's still himself. The Fixer also comes in terms with himself, despite the fact that he's destroyed beyond belief. In fact, Rivet even learned some lessons from this. So in terms of characterization, both Rivet and Ratchet are balanced in a way that brings in newcomers to the series, while also bringing back some of the old fans who hasn't played a Ratchet and Clank game in years. Other side characters like the Monk, Skid, LePerry, and Captain Quantum are utilized very well in this game. Each of them are dimensional counterparts of recognizable characters from this franchise, including the enemies Goons for Less. But the most important character in this game is the Clank dimensional counterpart named Kit. When you first meet her, she looks like another robot that is not interested in working with Ratchet. She does offer to help after our agreement to split up if things go wrong. But when we get to the archives and things get too chaotic, we see the destructive side of her. And we learn a little bit more that she hurt someone and almost got them killed, and she feels this guilt to this day. So Kit shunned herself into folly so that she doesn't hurt an innocent creature ever again, because all she is a weapon built to hurt people, and nothing more. Although, Ratchet kinda still has faith in her, cause she might actually be useful for the team. And so Kit stays with Ratchet until they finally reunite with Clank and Rivet. And then here comes what happens after that. Nefarious actually caught up with them, steals the Dimensionator, Rivet and Kit fights Nefarious, and then the Emperor comes in a big huge surprise, and with him in his army, the Emperor invades Sargasso. And so Rivet and Kit had to go back to their home planet before it is destroyed, while Ratchet and Clank has to search for one of the Resistance members named Captain Quantum. But then after saving Sargasso, we learn a little bit about what happened to Rivet's arm. She was on a mission to get into the office, and she was almost about to get inside, where out of nowhere, a huge killing machine attacked her and pretty much destroyed one of her arms. And it turns out that Kit was responsible for Rivet's injury. And then after headed back to Zavali,
You said it, pal!
both Nefariouses had unfortunately got the dimensional map. And with no choices left to do, Kit transforms into the War Machine, and Rivet realizes that she was the one who was responsible for her injury, in which it made her go into the emotional outrage at Kit cause she blew her arm off. Yet even then, Rivet has to still save everyone from the Sword-Doom prison. And when Rivet finally reunites with Clank and saved Ratchet and Kit, both Rivet and Kit had an emotional outrage at each other just because she didn't want to help save the multiverse. Even Rivet scrutinized her for not being there in the beginning to help her. And so, Rivet finally decided to cut ties with Kit, just so that Kit could just head back to Cephalia alone. And that part almost made me cry a little bit. Cause that scene almost reminds me of that one ending in Ratchet and Clank. Cause after Ratchet and Clank finally defeated Drek, Clank's arm actually got badly damaged. Ratchet pretty much brushes it off and said that it's not a big deal. Then when Ratchet pretty much walks away, Clank feels like that he's not needed anymore cause he's useless. And so Clank walks away with a broken arm, and then out of nowhere,
Hey, tin can!
Ratchet actually does care for Clank, and he offers to fix his arm. And that's not the only thing that Rift Apart reminded me of. In fact, Rift Apart actually lifted some of the older elements from the Ratchet & Clank games. Rivet turned into a giant war machine actually reminds me of the giant Clank fights in Ratchet & Clank. Now, it's a lot to take in, I admit, but this story is still engaging even if it be a simple game for younger audiences. I mean, the story of Rift Apart is not really much of a masterpiece or a 10 out of 10. But like, I am being genuine when I tell you that Rift Apart was the most joy that I ever had in the game for a long time. Yes, Rift Apart. Not even Astrobot gave me that same amount of joy when I finally played it. Listen, I'm not saying that the other games from the past era never gave me any amount of joy, but even so, Astrobot is just so similar to Mario's 3D platformer games, especially Galaxy. In fact, we've gotten more games from indie devs that cater so much to the Nintendo fans that grew up with Nintendo's old games that there are barely any games that actually cater to PlayStation fans that only grew up with the games that they released. I mean, sure, there's Ape Escape and Little Big Planet, Crash and Spyro. But so many of these indie devs are pushing the platformer genre to new heights with these silly little colorful games that I barely see anyone try to take a stab at that somewhat edgy era with a really compelling story as well. I always dreamed to see my generation to start creating games they want to make. Like an indie game that is a spiritual successor to Sly Cooper, the old Ratchet & Clank games, Jak and Daxter, Infamous, and many others from the PS2 era. But I think it's too soon to say that it will never happen though. I mean, a game bot is pretty much Ratchet & Clank, and Gear Grid is literally just Jak and Daxter, and that one isn't even out yet. So we're almost getting close to that. So in conclusion, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is an amazing game, and it is one of my favorite platformers out of all of them. I know not everyone is gonna think the same way about this game like I do. And that's okay. If you were one of those old fans or new fans who stayed away from this due to the Ratchet & Clank 2016 game alienating your view of the entire franchise, I don't blame you. But at least consider your purchase of Rift Apart to be an investment for these old series from the PS2 era to return. I mean, I have no idea how they did a 180 after the disaster of the 2016 game. But if it weren't for the success of the PS4 game, the complaints and feedback that they got, and with Spider-Man PS4's success, Rift Apart wouldn't have ended up the way that it did. I now have full confidence in this team that the next Ratchet & Clank game will probably be as good, if not better, than Rift Apart. Time will tell if that's the case. I mean, really, Insomniac's game lineup for this decade has leaked online, and we're not just getting another Spider-Man game, but there's a Wolverine and an X-Men game coming out this decade before the next Ratchet & Clank game. Waiting until 2029 for the next installment feels like an excruciating wait for another platformer game that shouldn't need that amount of development time. But at the same time, there are actually a couple of contenders for that argument. DK Bonanza took over 8 years to get finished, and development had to be moved over to the Switch 2 since the Switch wasn't powerful enough to run the game. But the wait was worth it, and it was one of, if not the best platformers to ever be released. Silksong took around 8 years to finally get finished and released. It started out as like a second playable character DLC, but the game got so ambitious that they decided to finally make it into a separate full release, and it became the most hyped game in the gaming space ever since. So if Insomniac needs that much development time to make this game the best it could be, then so be it. I'll be playing this game from start to end and do everything that this game has to offer, and I'm gonna be there picking it up day one. Well, okay, maybe not at launch though, maybe when it comes to PC, and then I will be able to play it. Listen, I still enjoy Astrobot. I don't have a hate boner for this game. In fact, there's a lot that this game does right that most AAA games don't. But PlayStation has released one of the best platformers they ever made during the PS5 era, and I do think the Ryo should celebrate those games as much as Astrobot. And even then, with the mixed bags, I think we all should still talk about it no matter what. We've got a mixed bag Lego game that retells the story of a mainline game that could have been better, a 3D platformer based on a game series that is known for its community-made content, in which I believe it still needs more love than what I got during launch, and another 3D platformer based on an old game series which is now the best one in the entire series, in which that game finally redeemed the franchise after the fans left it due to a series of disappointments. So if there's anything that I could give to Astrobot is this. I finally became a PlayStation fan again after years of moving on to Nintendo. Hey, listen, this generation had problems, but this is still make good games. Come on, to make